You remember Neopets, right? The browser-based game where you can adopt all kinds of cute and wacky animals, paint them any color you want, buy them outfits, and complete quests and minigames? Of course you do. Well, did you know that Neopets also has an official, currently supported trading card game distributed by Upper Deck? Yes, the same Upper Deck that used to distribute Yu-Gi-Oh! In the United States? I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, because the game is tiny, but I've been playing it since it first came out in 2024, and regrettably, I'm already worried for the future. What's up guys? I wanted to do something a little bit special in honor of hitting 100 subscribers, and so I've decided to do a long form video. I'll be back to my normal content starting tomorrow talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! But today, I hope you enjoyed this video I've prepared about my prediction of the death of the Neopets Battledome trading card game. Set 1 of the Battledome TCG officially debuted in North America on June 26, 2024, with the release of its first set, Defenders of Neopia, and its first two structure deck products, Fire and Star. I don't want to be too critical right out of the gate, because it was the launch window of the product, and so they were trying to establish the identity of the game at this time. But the game definitely had some key ups and downs during its Set 1 format. This isn't a tutorial, or even strategy content for that matter, but for context, in Battledome, each player gets to attach one Codestone, think Pokemon Energy cards, to their Neopet per turn. Codestone cards give your Neopet static combat increases, and the total number of Codestones under your pet equals its level. Each turn, after choosing whether or not you will attach a Codestone to your pet, you can play one card from your hand that has a level requirement equal to or lower than your Neopet's current level. But there are also ways to cheat this system and play multiple cards in a turn, and there are also card types that ignore this rule entirely. Games are played with a built-in best-of-3 system, with no hard reset between knockouts, other than permanents being cleared from the field, meaning decks not only have to be able to curve out consistently, but curve out consistently multiple times per game. Using these premises as a foundation, the Set 1 format of the game had two key identifiable tenets. 1. Low-level cards with strong setup effects quickly became staples. And 2. High-level cards with game-ending potential quickly became staples. I won't go too deep into the card pool, but there are 7 cards I want to make you aware of from Set 1. Nilo, Hubert's Special Dog, Hot Dog of Justice, Khan the Destroyer, Justice Hog, JHUDORA, and Naya. These cards are highly representative of the direction that I think I see Neopets going in, and it started in Set 1. First, we have Nilo. This structure deck and tournament pack exclusive 1-drop has a broken effect. It allows you to search your deck for any card with cost 1 or lower and play it. At the beginning of the game, this kind of effect is stronger than the likes of Demonic Tutor in Magic the Gathering. It doubles your early game consistency, effectively providing you with an extra playset of every 1-cost card in your deck, and the card itself is barely ever dead in your hand. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the 5-drop legends, Khan the Destroyer and Judge Hog. Khan the Destroyer wipes all of your opponent's permanents from the field, including their Codestones, basically resetting them to level 0, dictating what they can play from their hand, and establishing an unlosable point for you, the player who resolved it. And Judge Hog is almost the opposite, where he reveals the top 5 cards of your deck, chooses any number of those cards that you can play, and plays them, and puts the rest into your hand. People were playing Judge Hog as its own loop archetype in Set 1, and Khan was absolutely a staple, especially since you could cheat it out a turn early off of the card Iron Skeeth. So with these late game bombs in the format, how were players protecting themselves from these unwinnable situations? Thankfully, there is a 3-drop food card released in Set 1 called Hot Dog of Justice, which acts as a counterspell for legend type cards, which Judge Hog and Khan the Destroyer both are. Food cards can be played at any time and ignore the limitation of 1 card per turn, but you still have to meet the level requirement in the top left-hand corner of the card. So if the strategy was to hold your copies of Hot Dog of Justice in Set 1 to deny your opponent's game enders, how would you protect yourself against that and allow your game enders to resolve? Enter Hubert's Special Dog. This 2-drop food allows you to play it when your opponent plays a food card and negate that effect. So not only did we essentially have Counterspell, we also had Dispel in Set 1. Outside of powerful legends and food, Set 1 also contained some powerful fairy cards. Think of fairies like enchantments. You have one on the field, and if you play another, they replace each other, and when they leave the field, they're banished instead of going to the graveyard. The two most powerful fairy cards in Set 1 were undeniably JHUDORA and Naya. Naya allowed you to cheat a paintbrush card into play when you played her, essentially allowing you to skip a turn and immediately increase the stats of your pet. On top of this, she also rewarded you if the paintbrush you elected to use off of her effect was the rainbow brush, providing another layer of combat stat increases to the pet that you painted with the rainbow brush. Dropping Naya and not having your opponent answer it with another Naya was basically a stock in and of itself. JHUDORA, on the other hand, had a trigger effect that when she was discarded or milled by a card effect, she plays herself for free, ignoring the 1 card per turn limitation. As a continuous effect, JHUDORA provides you, the player, with Yawgmoth's Will for every turn she is on the field. Granted, with the 1 card per turn limitation, this effect is a little bit less impactful than it would be in a game like Magic the Gathering, where you can play as many cards as long as you have resources, but JHUDORA was an incredibly strong card that made grind game very, very interesting. So now that you have a baseline understanding of some of the most powerful cards in Set 1, let's talk about how the format shaped up. As a result of these cards, the format boiled down to an efficiency-oriented game with power turns and carefully spent interaction as core concepts. Because Naya was a fairy and not a legend card, she presented a particularly powerful problem when played. There was not very much counterplay to Naya when played early in a stock, when both pets have very few code stones on them. The power bonuses that she provided, along with the stat increases transferred to the pet by the rainbow brush, which, as a reminder, she cheated into play, were often just too much to play into, and as a result, it became best practice to just invest as little as possible into your active pet when your opponent played Naya, unless you had one of your own to catch up with. After months of this gameplay loop, players were getting a little fatigued, and in response, on October 11th, 2024, Upper Deck announced that starting on November 1st, Naya would be banned from competitive play. The Naya ban did help to slow things down in the short term, but it didn't help with the sense of boredom slowly creeping into the community. The tournament organizer at the store I work at, the person in our group who was most excited about the game, decided to quit because they weren't finding the game rewarding anymore, and another employee stepped up to take over the event. The community at the store stayed optimistic. After all, Set 2 was just over the horizon. Or so we thought. That's right. With an original slated release of November 15th, which would have been 2 weeks after Naya was banned, Upper Deck informed retailers that Set 2, Neopets' 25th anniversary celebration, had unforeseen issues in production, leading to an estimated delivery date of November 27th. Unfortunately, the 27th came and passed. No additional communication came through, and players were left in the dark, unsure of which link of the supply chain had broken down. Our store received product on December 2nd. I had to look back in my group chat for this one. So at this point, the game had been in a Set 1 format for almost 6 months, and Naya, arguably the strongest card from Set 1, had been banned for an entire month. By the time product was available, we were incredibly hyped to start cracking open packs and building around the new strategies that had come out. There was just one problem. This requires yet another small diversion. Battledome has always had its own version of the extra deck, called the Rainbow Pool, but the upgraded painted Neopets that you could access via the Rainbow Pool were pretty limited in scope in Set 1. The strongest ones provided raw stat increases and small internal synergies with the loose tribal themes that were present in the set. And so, the primary apparatus of deck building were the contents of the main deck. Consistency tools, internal synergies, game enders, all of them were inside the main deck. In contrast to this established pattern, Set 2 contained a total of 8 unique cards players could add to their main decks. Of course, that doesn't mean it was an 8-card set, so what were the other cards, you ask? New extra deck options, and a lot of them. Set 2 introduced the locations mechanic to the game, and along with it, the map piece card type. The location added to the game in Set 2 is called the Labre. The Labre location card starts the game inside the Rainbow Pool, but doesn't count towards the maximum of 10 painted Neopets in the Rainbow Pool, and enters the game by moving 4 Labre map piece cards into the Rainbow Pool. Once you have access to the Labre, It stays in play for the whole game, even after a Neopet has been knocked out, through a post-round cleanup when most cards are removed from the field and before new Neopets enter play. The Labray itself, once played, allows you to take an action once per turn to transform your Neopet into one of its rainbow pool forms that has a Labray icon in the top left corner. In Set 1 format, painting your Neopet required you to play a paintbrush card from your hand, taking both a card out of your hand and also preventing you from playing another card from your hand that turn. But with Labray, you could not only paint your Neopet without needing a paintbrush in your hand, you could also do it without burning your card for turn. So obviously this seems broken, right? Of course it was. Even with singleton copies of the Labray pieces, the combination of the game's mulligan and the addition of Labray Scientist, a level 1 card that allows you to search for 2 Labray pieces, decks were completing their Labray consistently by the second or third turn of the game. And it's not like the Labray pets sucked either. In fact, they're insanely strong. Remember how I said in Set 1 painted pets had small, coincidentally synergistic effects? Well, in Set 2, they have huge, independently powerful ones. Here are a couple of examples. Robot. This is the de facto proactive card advantage Labray type. Once per stock, your robot pet has the ability to roll a d3, heal that much damage, and then fill your hand back up to 7. Emptying your hand to complete the Labray, then immediately pivoting to robot and refilling to 7 was a very standard line in the Set 2 format. Next we have Mosaic, the aggro sweeper Labray form. This form gives your Neopet the ability to hold a unique type of counters called shards. Your Mosaic Neopet gains a shard counter for each damage it takes. Mosaic Neopets gain 1 attack point for each shard counter they hold, and their attack stat can exceed the normal maximum of 10. For defense, we have Sponge. Sponge pets gain a passive ability once per either turn to cut a single instance of damage in half, rounded down with no minimum, meaning that instances of 1 damage could be completely ignored, and instances of both 2 and 3 damage could be reduced to 1. A popular strategy in Set 1 format was using a card called Shield of Scorching for punishing your opponent for incremental combat damage. Sponge completely nullified this interaction with no downside. And last, we have Chocolate, which is the lottery form. When a Chocolate pet deals combat damage to a defending Neopet, its controller gets to look at X cards from the top of their deck, where X is the amount of damage dealt. That player can choose up to 1 of those cards and either play it ignoring its level requirement or add it to their hand. This card ignored your card for turn and allowed you to play level 5 blowout cards as early as the first turn of the second stock of a game. There were also many cards in the game which allowed you to customize the top card of your deck, even at instant speed, essentially letting you cheat out any card as long as you could stick 1 damage. As you may have noticed up to this point, all of the extra deck types I've covered have been accessible to multiple different Neopet species, which theoretically allows players to use the effects they prefer with the stat lines they prefer at deck construction. If you want a Neopet with high defense and health, but want access to a Mosaic form, there's JHUDORA. If you want a speedy but flimsy Mosaic pet to eat 1 big hit, get a bunch of shards, and sweep out the 3rd stock, you can play Uni. This is one of the things that made the game really interesting, picking and counterpicking Neopets based on stat lines and extra deck type access. Of course, this would be the case if not for pet-specific Labray forms. Yep, you heard that right. In addition to all of this widespread and generic power creep, Set 2 also introduced pet-specific Labray forms, meaning they were only available to 1 species of Neopet. For reference, players choose 5 Neopet species at deck construction to include. Some of these unique forms are kind of whatever, like Ice Bruce, which punishes your opponent for playing too many food cards. But some of them are actually game warping, like Alien Aisha. Let's take a second to read her. During your preparation phase, you may roll 1 die. Do the following based on the result. 1 through 3. Search your deck for 1 card. Place it on top of your deck. 4 to 5. Search your deck for 2 cards. Add 1 to your inventory, that's your hand, and place 1 on the top of your deck. 6. Search your deck for 3 cards. Play 1, add 1 to your inventory, and place 1 on top of your deck. Wow! That seems unfair, huh? Like maybe an auto include? Unfortunately, yes. and I would argue this was the case for a couple of pets, but namely Aisha, as mentioned, and MSP Poogle, which has the ability to stop your opponent's Neopet from attacking on every single one of their turns. Our local playgroup was still pretty healthy at this point, with about 14 regular players, but not everyone bought into Set 2 immediately upon release, and the difference in power level between a deck that was playing Labre and a deck that was not was actually insane, to the point where we quickly figured the best way to play the game was to complete the Labre as early as possible at pretty much any cost in every match. This ultimately boiled down to always trying to mulligan for Labre Scientist, Nilo, or large amounts of cheap card draw. And on top of this, the only card in the card pool to negate a Labre Scientist with was Hot Dog of Justice at the time, and at level 3, it felt too slow to reliably use for this point of interaction. There was a time during the Set 2 format where the game felt so fast that I actually removed this card from my deck entirely. The completely broken effects of the Neopets that you pulled out of the Rainbow Pool with the Labre had no form of meaningful interaction either, with the exception of Garlic Jub Jub, a completely non-proactive, pet-exclusive Labre form that essentially forces both players to play on vanillas. It was a decent counter for Sponge, but it was really slow, not only because of its low attack stat, but also because you needed the Labre yourself to access it, and you only get one stock on Jub Jub, so you had better pick the right pet to use it on. Sometimes, this was just impossible though, because of the fact that non-exclusive Labre forms could be just as threatening as the exclusive ones. It almost always just felt better to play proactively and use the strong effects offered in the set instead of trying to stop your opponent from playing for a limited amount of time. And honestly, despite this, the game was still pretty fun. Of course, it got very degenerate and incredibly fast, but it felt like your lines mattered, your mulligan mattered, and deck construction provided meaningful opportunity costs to ensure consistency both in accessing the Labre map pieces and making sure you had at least one code stone in your hand for the start of each stock so that you could actually play the game. Things definitely weren't perfect though, and in March, Upper Deck released a small rules change that made the blowout potential of Khan the Destroyer much less one-sided. Part of why this card was so strong in Set 2 format was because players were using it pre-level 5 with the effects of chocolate pets to stop their opponent from playing the game before they even started. The rules change made it so that he did not remove your opponent's code stones from their Neopet, which made the card much fairer. So much so that I cut it from my deck after the change. They also announced a rule change which prevented players from including more than one chocolate Neopet in their Rainbow Pool, meaning you couldn't access this powerful effect during more than one stock of the game. Shortly following the rules change, Upper Deck revealed cards for Set 3, Champions of Meridel, scheduled to release on June 28, 2025. Now, this was the second time that the game had a 6-month interval between set releases, and I think this was where our local player base really started to feel the ache. There were still plenty of us who enjoyed the new pace of play and how intense the game could get, but 6 months of Labre Turbo was a lot for our more casual players, and slowly, more of them started to drop the game. By the time Set 3 released, our weekly local had less than 10 regular players. Going into its release, it was clear from reveal season that Set 3 was going to power creep the game yet again. If you recall, one of the key tenets of Battledome is maximizing the value you get out of your one card that you get to play each turn. The Labre pet forms and existing cards that cheated this rule definitely sped up the pace of play, but everything was about to get even crazier. Enter Darrigan's Orb. Set 3 introduced an honestly upsetting number of overpowered cards into the game, but I don't think any of them even hold a candle to Darrigan's Orb. This level 1 equipment, which can be played on the first turn of the game, or be played via the effect of Nilo, has the following effect. During your preparation phase, you may search your deck for one card with a level requirement equal to or less than your Neopet's level. Play that card, or add it to your inventory. Then, your Neopet takes damage equal to that card's level requirement. I should not need to explain to you how absolutely messed up this is. With the context that I have given you so far, I should not need to explain the implications of this card being printed into the game. This card could play itself. This card could play Nilo. This card could play Labre Scientist. This card could tutor for the new level 1 card Zombified Peasants to replay your Labre Scientist from the graveyard with one code stone on your pet. At this point, consistency was just a concept in the deck building process. In fact, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted, and just like with the release of Set 2, where decks that had Labre could walk all over decks that didn't, decks that had Darrigan's Orb could do the same. This was true of other staples present in Set 3 as well, including Potato, a free counterspell usable specifically on level 1 cards, and Exploding Acorn, another free counterspell usable on any card except your opponent's first of the turn. And lastly, Spectre of Lord Darrigan, an incremental win condition splashable in any list. Aside from the new staples, new deck strategies became possible, unfortunately including hand denial. Through cards like Giant Spiders, a level 1 card that skipped your opponent's next draw phase, and Giant Spiderweb, a level 3 card that forced your opponent to discard a card in order to declare an attack, you were able to control the number of cards in your opponent's hand from a very early position. And as a reminder, during post-round cleanup, players do not draw up to a new hand size. You keep playing with whatever you have. As you might be able to imagine, the consistency afforded to these decks by the aforementioned staple cards made them more oppressive than they were interactive or fun to play against. So, in short, if you thought that the Set 2 Labre format was a fine-tuned, high-speed nightmare, you had no idea what you were getting yourself into with the release of Set 3, and frankly, I don't think that Upper Deck did either. Constantly fighting this kind of play pattern was taking a toll on the remaining casual players who were still making it to our weekly events. And so, just after a month of the Set 3 format, Upper Deck realized that they needed to do something to change the trajectory of both deck building and the pace of play. On August 8th, they announced yet another update to the ban list, taking effect on the 15th, and it wasn't a small one this time. There were two clear targets for this ban list: Labre decks and Hand Denial. You might think that this would be a good way to go about things, but in reality, I think it left most players kind of jaded. Darrigan's Orb was a very expensive card at the time, and had been printed approximately 1 month before the announcement of its limitation. I believe, if Upper Deck had tested Set 3 appropriately, that they would have realized that Darrigan's Orb was too pushed and too strong to begin with, and that its release would only serve to exacerbate existing problems in the game. The players who liked the card were mad that it was limited. The players who hated it from the beginning were mad that they had to play against it for as long as they did, and what's worse, Upper Deck made the decision to play catch-up with their products, and release Set 4, War of the Obelisk, not even 2 months after the release of Set 3, on August 20th, 2025. Like I said, the Set 3 emergency ban list went into effect on August 15th, so the dust didn't even have time to settle in a meaningful way before an entire new wave of cards was injected into the game. I remember just feeling really fatigued about the game at this point, with no real idea of how I wanted to build a strong deck, and no compelling direction for a unifying concept. Before the ban list, the game was so consistency-oriented that now, playing incrementally felt boring to me, and so I basically just ended up building a weaker and less consistent version of my Set 3 deck while I waited to decide what to build out of Set 4. Set 4 of Battledome was the first product that I did not buy into on release day. Instead, I just ordered singles on eBay, as the game has still not made it over to TCG Player yet, and at this rate, maybe it never will. Set 4 introduced the new Faction card type. While Paintbrushes, Labre Forms, and Internal Synergies promoted certain gameplay patterns for decks, Factions are pre-created archetypes with their own emblem cards that start the game in the Rainbow Pool, and are revealed when you play your first card of the game that is associated with that faction. You can only commit to one faction, and you choose when creating your deck list. Each faction has an assigned 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 cost card associated with it. The Awakened faction manipulates the cards in the graveyard. The Order of the Red Erasim enhances your card effect damage. The Sway lets you substitute the results of dice you roll during the game. The Brute Squad gives you extra opportunities to deal combat damage to your opponent's Neopet, and the Thieves Guild steals cards from your opponent's hand, deck, and field, and even has the ability to play them later. Even to this day, at time of recording, I have still not updated my deck list to include a faction card, or any of the faction-associated cards for that matter. In fact, only one card from Set 4 stuck in my deck at all: Greed, a level 1 spell that draws 3 cards and deals 1 damage to your Neopet. This is the best low-to-the-ground raw plus available in format right now, and the damage is meaningless if your pet is painted as a sponge. But just because I chose not to play a faction doesn't mean that was the case for others. Our local playgroup started off with a variety of different faction decks. We had at least one player on each of the factions for at least 1 or 2 weeks. But after a couple of locals in the set 4 meta, 2 key things became clear. First, with a majority of the power cards in dedicated library decks being hit to 1, alongside the fact that players have always only been able to include 1 copy of each of the 4 map pieces in their decks, there were times when a library player would get incredibly unlucky and have a piece or an important consistency card stolen by someone on Thieves Guild, rendering their deck more or less defenseless. Second, once the Brute Squad had met its faction condition and gained a permanent combat damage buff, it was only a matter of time before they took control over the game and established a winning position. For this reason, players started moving away from the other 3 factions. Why take a card out of your hand every turn to do burn damage in Erasim when you can play a Brute and have it attack your opponent on each subsequent turn? Why worry about manipulating your die rolls to win on the Sway when you can simply take away your opponent's win condition before they've drawn it by playing Thieves Guild? This pressure to frankly conform or be beat by something stronger resulted in even more of our casual player base dropping the game, with the remaining casual players holding out for the upcoming structure deck products JHUDORA's Bluff and ILLUSEN's Glade. Remember JHUDORA, the set 1 card, the Yawgmoth's Will that lasts an entire stock? Well, 3 ban lists later, and she's still in the game, and on September 10th, 2025, she was finally reprinted in a structure deck product no less, which was great for players that still didn't have a copy. The JHUDORA deck introduced a new theme to try building the deck around, which plays nicely with the existing JHUDORA adjacent discard effects present in the game so far. But for those of us who already had JHUDORA, there was also the ILLUSEN's Glade product, which introduced even more new cards to the game and tried to promote yet another theme, similar to the JHUDORA deck. These products were, overall, well received by our local community, and most of our players picked up a copy of both decks, and after doing some testing and decklist revision, it became clear. We had a problem. By now, players were pretty much accustomed to what decks would accomplish with JHUDORA, especially in the late game, with access to many powerful cards in the graveyard. But in addition to this existing staple, the decks introduced arguably 3 new staples to the game as well. JHUDORA and ILLUSEN's Comb are both repeatable advantage staples that can be played on turn 1. Answering these cards feels like you're putting yourself behind, because remember, on most turns, we're only allowed to play 1 card. And if you have to choose between removing this and removing a Darrigan's Orb with your Pant Devil, I think you know which one you're gonna pick. Then, we get to Illusion herself. We know that fairy cards are supposed to be strong, but let's take a look at what Illusion specifically can achieve. She has a once per turn effect, which lets you, in any order of your choice, perform the 3 following effects. Draw 2, mill 2, and choose 2 cards from your graveyard and put them on the bottom of the deck. Fielding an early game Illusion and using her to recycle your engine cards and codestones while digging for your free counterspells, Potato and Exploding Acorn, and milling important targets for your inevitable late game JHUDORA feels like an unlosable position. With Illusion and both Combs in the game, players now have a mind-boggling number of outstanding turn 1 plays to start games off explosively and consistently. But you might be saying, wait a second, Illusion mills 2 and recycles 2. By drawing 2 cards, she actually puts you much closer to losing inevitably via deck out. And that would be true if not for Leaf Shield. Leaf Shield is a level 3 equipment that also came out in the Illusion's Glade structure deck. And honestly, it has a pretty negligible effect on the field. Each time you recycle cards, your Neopet gains 2 defense until your next turn. Based on the power level of everything we've discussed up to this point, you should be saying to yourself, why in the world would anybody play this card? And you would be right, if that were its only effect. Leaf Shield also has an effect in the graveyard. During your turn, you can recycle 3 other cards from your graveyard to the bottom of the deck, and if you do, you get to play the Leaf Shield. This does not count as your card for turn, it is not a hard once per turn effect, meaning if you have 2 copies of the card in your graveyard and your Neopet is level 3 or higher, you can endlessly loop the effect of Leaf Shield using the new copy to replace the one on the field, since you choose which equipment slot the Leaf Shield is played to, and essentially ignore the risk of a deck out loss condition entirely. In extreme cases, this card enables you to perfectly customize cards to be drawn off the effect of Illusion, or even just Greed, which we discussed previously. Additionally, this loop significantly increases overall turn length, and the elimination of a deck out loss case has resulted in a much larger number of games at our locals going to time in the round. I want to try to summarize my thoughts elegantly, but it's been over 3 months of playing the game like this, and I think our local player base has honestly hit a breaking point. In the past couple of months, attendance has never exceeded the single digits, and on our worst week, only 2 of us showed up for the event. As a result, our tournament organizer, who themselves quit the game during the Set 3 metagame, has decided to change our locals to a bi-weekly event instead of a weekly one. What started as a dedicated and tight-knit community, consisting mainly of people who were invested in the resurgence of the Neopets IP, became a shell of its former self, where people end up going primarily to see their friends from locals, and secondarily to play the game that we all thought was so fun one time long ago. So what happens now? Set 5, The Void Within, has technically been in spoiler season since June of this year, but with no concrete release date available anywhere on the internet from what I can find, and no updates on the official Discord server for card reveals in the past 10 days regarding it or Set 6, which had its infographic revealed on December 5th, you could say I'm a little concerned. Set 5 does introduce some new cards that could see play in a variety of main decks, namely with the plan mechanic if you ask me, but honestly, it might just be too slow to truly consider adding to most lists, and all of the Void cards they've revealed are designed more or less to just synergize internally using an entirely new system called Void Counters. And despite the fact that I've been keeping up with card reveals and continue to attend locals, the lack of communication, lack of concrete release schedules, seemingly out of touch understanding of what is actually being played in the game, and format fatigue are slowly pushing me away. Part of my enjoyment of the Neopets Battledome trading card game originally was that it could be a less sweaty game than Yu-Gi-Oh! For me to turn my brain off and have some fun socially, but the reality is that the game is 100% bonkers, and if you spend just a couple hours playing anything close to an optimized deck, you'll definitely realize it for yourself. In order to reasonably address the problems that exist in the game, which contribute both to exceedingly long turns, exceedingly long games, and gameplay interactions that are just outright unfriendly to casual players, Upper Deck would have to make a huge design pivot in their R&D process or release yet another ban list addressing everything they consider to be problematic all at once and establishing a new power level for the game. But I fear that doing this would drive away some of their most dedicated players, the ones who found these broken deck ideas and combos in the first place. It puts them in a really difficult position. Because of the way that sets are distributed, getting old singles is very difficult. Like I said, the game is not available on TCG Player, and I found that eBay truly is the best option for acquiring singles. With that being said, a brief search on eBay yielded one single listing for Darrigan's Orb, a card played in literally every deck in the game. This is not sustainable. New players may be attracted to the game by the IP, but once they start attending events, I fear they will stare down a meta environment in dismay, realizing they need to open Set 2 product, or find listings on eBay to get their Labre pieces, Labre Forms, Labre Scientist, and then move on to opening Set 3 product to obtain Darrigan's Orb, and more. It's hard to say if a rotation would even help at this point, because Sets 2 and 4 do not stand alone as coherent packs to build decks out of, in my opinion, and many of the game's most ubiquitous staples come from the first set, third set, and constructed products. I'm not making this video because I hate Neopets. In fact, I think I've played the most out of this game out of anybody I know, but I really can't see it lasting much longer if Upper Deck continues to handle it in the way they have for the last year and a half. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss my future content. I'll see you next time.